So let me ask about Nietzsche. Is God dead? What did he mean by that statement?
Yeah.
What's, in your sense, the truth behind the question and the possible set of answers that our world today provides?
Good. So, I think that there's something super perceptive about Nietzsche's diagnosis of the condition at the end of the 19th century. So not so far from the condition that I think we're currently in. And I think there's an interesting question what we're supposed to do in response. But what is the condition that we're currently in? When Nietzsche says God is dead, I think, like I was saying before, he means something like the role that God used to play in grounding our existence is not a role that works for us anymore as a culture. Mm-hmm. And when people talk about a view like that nowadays, they use a different terminology, but I think it's roughly what Nietzsche was aiming at. They say we live in a secular age. Our age is a secular age. And so what do people mean when they say that? I think, first of all, it's a descriptive claim. It could be wrong. The question is, does this really describe the way we experience ourselves as a culture or as a culture in the West or wherever it is that we are? So what does it mean to say that we live in a secular age, an age in which God is dead? Well, first thing is, it doesn't mean there are no religious believers, because there are plenty. Mm-hmm. There are lots of people who go to church or synagogue or mosque, every week or more. And there are people who really find that to be an important aspect of the way they live their lives. But it does mean that for those people, the role of their religion, the role that their religious belief plays in their life isn't the same as it used to be in previous ages. So what's that role? We'll go back to the High Middle Ages. That was clearly not a secular age. That was a religious age. And so there we are in 1300. Dante is writing the Divine Comedy or something. And what did it mean then to live in a sacred age? Well, it meant not just that the default was that you were a Christian in the West, but that your Christianity, your religious belief, your religious affiliation justified certain assumptions about people who didn't share that religious belief. So you're a Christian in the West in 1300, and you meet someone who's a Muslim, and the fact that they don't share your religious belief justifies the conclusion that they're less than human. Mm-hmm. And that was the ground of the Crusades. That was the religious wars of the High Middle Ages. To say that we live in a secular age is to say that, not that there aren't a lot of people who have religious belief, there are, but it's to say that their religious belief doesn't justify that conclusion. If you're a religious believer and you meet me, and suppose I'm not a religious believer, learning that about me doesn't justify your concluding that I'm less than human.
Right.
And that's the kind of liberalism of the modern age. Most of the time we think that's a good thing. We let 1,000 flowers bloom. There are lots of ways to live a good life. And there's some way in which that is a nice, progressive kind of liberal thought. But it's also true that it's an undermining thought, because it means if you're a religious believer now, your belief can't ground your understanding of what you ought to be aiming at in a life in the way it used to be able to. You can't say, as a religious believer, I know it's right to do this, because you also know that if you meet someone who doesn't share that religious belief and so doesn't think it's right to do that necessarily, or does but for different reasons, you can't conclude that they've got it wrong. Right. So there's this sort of unsettling aspect to it.
Well, isn't it true that you can't conclude as a public statement to others, but within your own mind, it's almost like an existentialist version of belief, which is like you create the world and around you. Like, it doesn't matter what others believe. You don't. There's not. It's actually almost like empowering thought. So as opposed to the more traditional view of religion, where it's like a tribal idea, like where you share that idea together. Here you have the full Back to Sartre, full responsibility of your beliefs as well.
Good, good. But what you're describing is not a religious believer, right? You're describing someone who's found in themselves the ground of their existence rather than in something outside of themselves. So the religious belief, I mean, if you go full Sartrean, then, well, you're not in a position to criticize others for the choices that they make, but you are in a position to criticize them for the way in which they make them, sure, either taking responsibility or not taking responsibility. Right. But the religious believer used to be able to say, look, the choices that I make are right because God demands that I make them. Mm-hmm. And nowadays, and so it would be wrong to make any others. Mm-hmm. And nowadays, our kind of, to say that we live in a secular age, is to say, well, you can't quite do that and be a religious believer. Your religious belief can't justify that move, and so it can't ground your life in the way it does. So it's sort of unsettling. I think that's one of the interpretations of what Nietzsche might have meant when he said God is dead. God can't play the role for religious believers in our world that he used to.
But we nevertheless find meaning. I mean, you don't see nihilism as a prevalent set of ideas that are overtaking modern culture. So a secular world is still full of meaning.
Good. Well, I think that's the interesting question. I think it's certainly possible for a secular world to be a world in which we live meaningful lives, worthwhile lives, lives that are sort of worthy of respect and that we can be proud of aiming to live. But I think it is a hard question what we're doing when we do that. And that is the question of existence. Sort of what does it mean to exist in a way that brings us out at our best as the beings that we are? That's the question for existentialism.